All right, Brandon. Um, Today I wanted to discuss with you something that I had discussed with a few of the others in the TOE community, but I had not gotten around to discussing with you. God complex and dogmatism. So I think it'll be interesting to have an entire discussion focus on that very issue with you specifically because you are coming from a more psychological perspective. And it seems like you have some classifications as to the kinds of behaviors or like let's say psychological archetypes that exist when it comes to God complex. So generally, could you give a definition of what you believe God complex is about?
Hmm. I would say that I would describe God complex as mm, I guess the best word I could put it as is a possession via the individual's will slash their desire, their floor of desires, in context to their well, there are two particular functions. It would have to be their affinity towards the concept of strength and of repetition in a slight degree. But in repetition would be um, related to the more base concept of causality, which is the integrated motions of how things are or how things are observed.
Okay, so it sounds like you're using a lot of language that um, well, it sounds like you're describing something that like of your own model in a way. So I didn't understand any of that.
Yeah,
It was
sure.
very, very abstract. Um, so that maybe we can start off with like what you just a simple definition before we get into your method and classifications and
Sure,
categories
sure, sure.
and all that. Because everything you just discussed, I know has a very logical and straightforward reasoning behind it, and so that's fine, and we could get into that. But yeah, just a
Sure.
simple definition for now. That would be great. Like, what do you think God complex is?
Well, I would uh, describe it as since it's going to be in context to theories of everything, right? It would be best to state it to be something of an obsession with placing oneself outside of a social context and treating oneself as the observer and the only one that is able to know what is truly going on.
Okay, so it's almost solipsistic.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Um, so what got me really interested in speaking to you about this personally was because you had said something that remember I told you that when you explained you had after I had let me start over. I had done an interview with I don't know who, but after the interview, you said that you had watched it, and it reminded you, hey, in our interview, we didn't discuss God complex, but here's my idea, or here's my outlook and my opinion. And what you had written was incredibly apt. And I had told you that it in my mind, I had seen it like a play by play, and that I had like experienced what you were talking about with other people. So maybe we could go back to that chat. And
Let me.
I don't know how much we've spoken since then, but you had said some things that I want to go back. Yeah, right here. You said I'm reflecting on the entirety of the chat. No, that was a different thing. God complex. Da, da, da. Here it is. Here it is. So, do you permit? I'm going to read this out loud.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So, listen to Daniel's interview, and I don't think we had the time to discuss the God slash Messiah complex. So, that right there, I want to mention as well. We should include the Messiah thing because I think they might be different. Some people don't
Yes.
consider themselves like God, but they consider themselves like the Messiah, for lack
Hmm.
of the term God. Um, so, we'll discuss that as well. There was a bridge that could have led to it in your interview, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so here's what you said about God complex. You said a strong will function predisposes one to a God complex due to how they engage with context and connections. They're prone to be solipsistic, detached from others, and persistently absorbed in their own abstractions, that is, internalized context. It's further reinforced by their likely rather weak harmony function. So that's something I think you're talking about your own work here. Harmony
Yes.
function, what is that? We'll discuss that later. So it's further reinforced by their rather weak harmony function, making it difficult to connect and align with others, further ostracizing themselves from social groups. So that is the very first thing. Then you said something about Messiah complex,
Yep.
which is the Messiah complex comes from the individual solving internalized contexts that plagued them while believing that everyone else suffers from the same problem. So, for example, if I was suffering from something and I figured out a way to get out of that suffering, I'm going to think that that method applies to everyone. And even if it does, the idea that you're the one who discovered it, it might be something of an issue, but we can get into that.
Yep.
But that I found very interesting. And then you said problems are will centric in that they are specific to each individual's own will, their own floor of interconnected emotional context. Now, I think Lucy might be interested in what you're saying here because context is something very central in what she thinks.
Yes.
And then you go on to say that because the will-driven individual has been living in their own head, they may believe that everyone is just like them too, being prone to reduce the complexity of connections down to their most basic elements, e.g., I am the same as the universe, and these two people are exactly the same when it comes to fill in the blank. Then you said, anyway, if the individual is more empathetic, being more inclined towards harmony, for example, they may be far more willing to directly help others, believing they need to be saved. So that right there fits in with the Messiah complex. I am here to save. I'm the savior. So maybe we can include savior, God complex, Messiah complex, and savior complex. Maybe there's a difference between the three. We can discuss that as well. We're almost finished. Often, resonance driven people are highly messianic because they have a rather even measure of harmony and will. Jesus, I believe, was this very type. Resonance, in its general function, to understand and relate to others, makes them feel more able than most to help others. So that whole thing that you sent me, I found incredibly sophisticated. You interwove a little bit of your own work in terms of functions, right? What is a harmony function, resonance function, and how is that relevant to explaining God, Messiah slash Savior complex are things I want to explore with you.
Yeah.
Um, so let's begin with the. There's so much to break down there. There's so much there, but let's begin with these functions. What
Sure.
is the harmony function, and what is will centrism? What is the role of will centrism, and what is will centrism in your view?
Okay. So I think I'll break it down like this. All of the functions mentioned, harmony, resonance, and will, all of those belong to the tonal domain, which is just a categorization of a certain type of function. And tonality would basically be emotional affect, context, affection, etc., things of that nature. Um, when I speak about fragments in any particular way. Rather, a fragment is specifically just a specific um, archetype, a specific aspect. A fragment
Psycho-
is, for example,
Psychological archetype.
yes, yes,
Okay,
uh,
a fragment of a psychological archetype.
yes. Um, Harmony, for example, would be one fragment. Will is another. Resonance is another. Right. Um, these fragments are defined by the specific stage in which they are um, the specific cognitive stage that the individual goes through when they are interpreting or being in the world specifically. Harmony is the, one could say, the first stage. It is external. It is uh, caused on account of, or rather, it is engaged via impact. Um, so when someone receives information, harmony would be the first thing that is related. The individual is immediately synchronized with what is um, being shown to them, for example. And then
Are
it
they
goes into,
trying to harmonize information that they receive, or they are harmonizing themselves to that information? What do you mean? You see what I mean? I'm trying to render these things a bit more concrete, and maybe because there is so much to unpack and it is quite abstract in some way, but maybe we should begin by contextualizing God complex a little bit more. Like, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about it? Something I probably should have done at the very beginning. But personally, my motivation is that I'm observing God complex as a behavior, not only in the toe community, but in general in the intellectual community. Let's say people who deal with ideas and who work with knowledge and so on. So I've seen this and also here in Colombia, I'm involved with a lot of communities that, for lack of a better term, they don't really like this word, but they are shamans. So people who work with medicines, let's say. Um, Taitas is the actual term that they prefer here, the indigenous people here anyway. But they're like spiritual leaders and so on, and they deal with things like ayahuasca, kambo, bufo, lots of other psychedelics and stuff, mushrooms, and so these are people that are working on wisdom and knowledge, and the same thing happens. We get God complex issues because these are people that seem to conflate their knowledge with themselves as being the source of that knowledge or the channel of that knowledge. And although it might be true to some degree, that conflation is has come to the point where there's no longer a conflation. It is just a belief that they are, and it's the two are no longer distinct from each other. As in, by two, I mean the source of the knowledge and the knowledge itself. So, um, to contextualize everything, God complex to me is, well, that's the motivation for me to want to explore it because I see it in the toe community Discord. I don't want to mention any names. I don't want to make this personal on any level. If anyone resonates with what I'm saying and they believe that I'm talking about them, I mean, that's not my intention. But really, it's just about observing God complex from an objective place. I've gone through it personally, so I'm not attacking anyone. But that's my motivation. I think it's interesting. It might be an elephant in the room that no one is really discussing. I think it does inhibit good communication between people, or at the very least, it might even inhibit your ability to transmit your ideas for people to listen and your credibility and so on. Um, because I do think that often the message that comes from people who suffer from God complex is accurate or useful. Um, and so this is why I don't shy away from people who do behave as if though they know better than anyone else or whatever. Um, but I do think it is an issue that dives into mental health at some point as well. There's some mental health issues there that can occur, um, and of course, just general social etiquette. Uh, it can cause issues in your own life if you behave in certain ways that are perceived as quite weird and everything. So yeah, that's just to contextualize everything a little bit more, the motivations, what we're talking about, why we're talking about it. Now I think we could dig in a little bit more into what you were talking about. So seeing it from that point of view, um, what do you believe God complex is insofar as it is something that should be dealt with or it shouldn't be dealt with, or is it something that people should be aware of or not be aware of? Like, because you categorize it just in terms of like the mechanics of it and like why it happens, it seems to me. But I'm just curious, do you believe that it's something that people should try to be aware of and work through those issues and reduce God complex, or You know, what are your motivations, in other words?
Hmm. Well, my motivations are almost always to observe, but when it comes to what could be done, it's like, yeah, it's God complex is ostracizing, but I don't know. To them, they may think that it is not all that bad because, after all, who wouldn't want to be themselves?
Mm.
Uh, and that's tricky to get out of, or to convince others to get out of. It's like you have to almost have them realize that that is not exactly what they really want, but who can really say what that individual wants without asking them, of course, right? So I guess
So
it begins with asking what they do want.
you're right, because like here's the thing: I lived in a house, a home for schizophrenics when I was young. I think I was around 12 or something like that, or 10. I think I was 10 years old, and I lived them with them. There was about 20 of them. My mother was working there in this house, and I observed. And my one of my family members is schizophrenic as well. So when it comes to mental health issues, whether it's brought on by, let's say, chemical reasons or whatever in the brain, or you know, brought on by emotional experiences, or just dealing with knowledge and truth, I think the issue precisely is that it's almost like a psychosis. Someone who is going through God complex would, they're so convinced by it in the moment that it is wrong to say that they are not God in a way, or it is wrong to believe that they are not. Because, like you said, who would not want to be themselves, or who would try to deny the reality in front of them? It makes it very unstable. So once you flip from human to God or Messiah or whatever, it's very difficult to get out of it, because it's knowledge, it's not belief at that point. You think you know, like you know it in a way. Now, I've never gotten to that level. I've gotten close to it, but I've always been able to observe myself going through that feeling and that notion. Like, wow, why am I, you know? So I don't know what it would be like to really believe it and to not be able to get out of it. But it seems to me like it's not for lack of desire. I think someone would, if given the option, hey, do you want to have the ability to pull yourself out of God complex if it ever occurs? I think most people would say, yeah, yeah, I want that ability at the very least. And then you can also ask them, well, if you are God, wouldn't you have the ability to separate yourself from that issue, right? Because you are God. So that might be a tool to help people out of it. But this is why I want to get into Messiah and Savior complex, because I think these are things that are a lot more common, and not too many people are in God complex mode where they really think that they're God. Um, I've been to Jerusalem. A lot of people there do believe they're Jesus Christ. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Um, and so, you know, there might be different levels to this, different facets, and I want to explore all those things very clearly. That's why I was trying to contextualize everything. I don't want us to dive too deeply, too quickly in the technicals, because
Yep,
I want this to be relatable to people. I want people to understand what we're talking about.
sure.
Okay, I think I've done a good enough job to expose it. Um, where do you think we should begin? Because I'm already a bit confused myself now. Like, where do we attack this thing from? Because it, it's so broad.
Yeah, and a lot of it is interconnected.
Hmm.
Mm. Well, the goal is mostly to talk about these mm, states of mind.
Yeah, and should we talk about like how do we get into them? What causes them? Because to me, again, I see two. I see a pattern here. There's two reasons people get into God complex.
Yeah,
One, the discovery of knowledge. There's something about, I think maybe in evolutionary terms, when you discover knowledge, which is why people gossip, by the way. People love hearing gossip, because when you have access to information, and by the way, this ties into conspiracy theories as well. When people believe that they know something that others don't, that's power. They say knowledge is power. So it's very easy for people to believe things that aren't true, precisely because it makes them feel empowered. And so I think it's just the simple action or act or receive, like the receiving of information, is what causes that state of mind, because it makes someone feel empowered. If I know something, if I just, so for example, if you've independently derived calculus and you didn't even know that calculus existed, right? And you'd be like, it works. Like I can do mathematics. I can like, send projectiles into space and it'll work and all that stuff. Well, obviously you're going to say, I have the power. Um, but you didn't know that it already existed, right? Like, so the interesting thing there would be, well, if you have the power to independently achieve knowledge that we all have access to, then you really are powerful. So there is a grain of truth there that kicks you into this loop that says, okay, even though I didn't create that information, I still have the power to wield it and to understand it and do it on my own. So it's very, that power empowering aspect, I think, is one of the things that creates this state of mind. And so, do you believe there's any other reason? Because that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, that is one that I have thought about before we started the call. It was I'm not going to get into my own terminology here. I'm going to try to describe what's going on there. Um, it would be that those particular individuals that are, they discover or rediscover pre or already existing information through their own train of thought. Uh, they tend to have a mm, not a great means of discerning and integrating information on account of them finding it difficult to do so. There's like an inherent difficulty in learning new things, and it's be, it's because their internal means of efficiency in doing those tasks are not as good as others. They can be very intelligent, of course, and they can definitely acquire high amounts of information, but they're not going to be too keen on parsing all of it. They'll just kind of take it in and then just kind of, for example, toss it into a bin and just let it sit there. And whenever they need it, they'll just pull out that information in a highly generalized thing. It'll be like a string of context as opposed to the thing, the specific strip of paper that they threw into the bin. It'll just be like, oh, I recall doing that like, I don't know, years ago or something like that. It'll be very non-specific information. But because it's all in a bin and it's not all sorted and there's a high degree of difficulty in sorting all of the information, the things that they do find and latch onto are the things that really uh, get them going. In context to God complex, it would be like, yeah, that the example of rediscovering calculus. It would be like they did all of the work. They try to make all these mathematical formulae, and once it all works, they go, wow, it works, fantastic. And then they just get this emotional reaffirmation, and it just kind of fuels them into thinking that it is indeed their own thing and it never existed. But they never looked into it. They never went out to go find that information to see if it already existed. They just went, aha, it's here. I did this. It is all me. And yeah,
So so insufficient information, you would say, is part of God complex. If you don't have the information because you didn't look for it,
yep,
that could put you in this state of mind.
yep.
In other words.
And
And also, you
difficulty of
mentioned
parsing. Yep,
lack of specificity, right?
yep.
You have this bin of information and you're generalizing a lot. You never go and specifically discuss anything. So keeping things general is one way that someone can, making sweeping statements in a way can make
Yeah,
someone believe that
exactly.
they are God in a sense.
Yeah,
So,
and if they generalize enough, it's just like, oh yeah, this fits in here. Oh yeah, this fits in here too. Oh yeah, yeah. It'll just keep going. Yep,
okay, so it's like a catch-all basically.
yep. Basically,
If you say like, look, existence is everything, Well, then when someone says, well, it's not this, you'd be like, yeah, well, that fits into the existence of everything.
Yep.
So catch-all term, generalization makes you feel empowered. Very interesting. So now we have three distinct reasons for what can cause the state of mind. Very interesting. So let's reiterate. We said the evolutionary pressure to like it's linked to survival, right? If you have information, even if it's false, but you believe you have information that no one else does, it empowers you.
Yep.
Um, for survival reasons. Then we said lack of specificity, so creating a general catch-all terms, which makes it easy for you to convince yourself everything that you're talking about fits into something I've already discovered. And and the third was,
Is not looking for
oh, yeah,
information.
so insufficient information, not looking for things that already might exist alongside yours or previous to your ideas and so on.
Yep.
Very good. Like we're
Yep.
starting to get more concrete here.
There
I
is
know.
one more. It kind
Okay.
of ties inside with generalization, but they also have this tendency to play deeply into confirmation bias, and that just reinforces their own thoughts.
Okay. Can you come up with an example?
Yeah, like mm,
Like playing into confirmation bias. Like first, can you give an example of confirmation bias, maybe?
yeah. So when they um, when I need words, I need words. Um, it's like they have an idea and then they want to see whether or not it's true. They go looking for the information, but they only, hand pick things that confirm the thing that they thought of already, as opposed to looking to contrasting
Yeah.
things because they don't want this emotional disruption of it being wrong.
Yeah. So the basis for pseudoscience, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So looking for information that confirms your hypothesis. You're trying to confirm, and so playing into that is just basically meaning, you know, being subject or victim of confirmation bias.
Yep.
Okay. So I just want to make that clear. What did you mean by playing into that? So that would be the fourth thing that, let's say, maybe expands your state of mind of God complex, right?
Oh yeah.
Because you're confirming. It depends what you're confirming. I mean, if you're confirming that the Eiffel Tower exists, you're never going to believe that you're the one who origined it or built it with your mind somehow. But if you're playing into confirmation bias insofar as the ideas that came from you believe, then of course that inflates your sense of God complex. I don't know if it would put you in a state of God complex unless you start with the hypothesis, I am God, and then you start to look for that information. But I don't think most people start with that. I think some people, well, maybe some people do. That's what solipsism is, right? They say, well, maybe I am God. Maybe I am originating reality with my mind, and I am, player one, and everyone else are non-player characters. So I don't know, but that's interesting. Okay, so let's try to make the distinction now between God complex, Messiah, and Savior. These three can they be equivocated, or do they have their own unique identity somehow, like or characteristics?
Yeah, they're all definitely unique. Messiah and Savior are more closer together than God Complex and all of the other ones. But let's see, Messiah Complex. What could cause Messiah Complex? That I can't say I've looked too deeply into. I just kind of see how it looks more than anything else. I mean, in a way, it is somewhat reinforced in the same way that God Complex is, and Savior Complex, I don't think would emerge in quite the same way.
But can we just start with simple definitions for these things, and then we'll go into their differences?
Yeah, yeah. So Messiah Complex basically believes has an individual belief that they can save everyone because they have a problem that they believe everyone has, right? While Savior Complex is just simply they wish to help everybody, but not necessarily save them, just help them.
Okay, I think I'm gonna have to disagree there because
Okay.
you're using the word save in both these categories, and I think Messiah, if we really go for what a Messiah is, it's about bringing a message. It's not necessarily about saving. Now, the message might come to save some, but ultimately, it's like don't shoot the messenger. I can bring messages that will destroy people as well. So, like the apocalypse, for example, someone who basically believes that they're one of the two witnesses in the biblical um, story of it. There's a something called there's a concept of two witnesses that will come at the end of times and announce the apocalypse is near or here. So I would say it's not necessarily about saving. It's about a message that is transmitted by God. A prophecy of some kind. I would say that that's distinctly different than the savior, which is literally about saving humanity. So, like for example, you know, I watched Eric Weinstein's latest podcast with Joe Rogan, and the way he was speaking, you could tell that he's very lucid and he's not necessarily falling into savior complex, but he does mention responsibility in a big way. I mean, he says, "Look, I'm not even a physicist uh, or a mathematician, but I already feel that I'm responsible for, you know, what's going on today because we are going to kill ourselves. So I think humanity is literally it's almost 0 hour, right? And us in the public intellectual sphere, whatever, have a responsibility in some way. So that's definitely bordering on not savior complex, but because I think that is rational and you can feel responsible if you do have the knowledge or the ability to save, then you should. I think we teach that in society in general, and I think we're probably evolutionarily programmed for it as well. But there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, um, like, where do you get the authority first to say that you really have the capability even to help everyone? Like, I think that's where it borders on, like, you know what I mean? Like, so Einstein, his work led to the ability to harness nuclear power. Now, that is that is helping the world, but you can't view it that way. The moment that you take on the responsibility on your shoulders that you have to help every single human being, I think is starting to become a complex because no one human like Einstein couldn't do it alone. I mean, it took a bunch of other people, right? It took the whole Manhattan projects, Oppenheimer, and so on, for people to make that work. Nuclear fission, that is. So, do you see what I mean? Like, you gotta kind of realize your place that you might have a piece of information that is key, but so is everyone else. They're all keys that are necessary or required to saving or to making something work. So that level of humility is required for you to straddle the line between falling into saviorism as a complex and just saviorism as a responsibility that is, socially encouraged. Do you agree or disagree?
I mean, I can only retain specific definitions of those terms. I mean, if you want to speak about the ones that you spoke about, then we can. But yeah, sure. Um, in regards to saviorism and savior complex, yeah, no, those are definitely almost coinciding in my own head. But
Mhm.
uh, yeah,
Because
no,
so I just wanted to draw like that picture for you to think like that's what saviorism is to me. I think the messianic thing is a little bit more obscure. It'd be a bit more difficult to pin down, but I think the clarity as to the difference between the three becomes it emerges from just describing each one, and I think you know when it comes to the Messiah thing, I think people are obsessed with having like they are the chosen ones to bring a message, and it's not. I mean, they can be correlated. Someone can believe that they are the Messiah that is also the Savior. They can believe they are both, but I think it can just be that people believe that they're just the objective Messiah. I have to give this to the world, and it's my responsibility. And after that, if it saves people or doesn't, that's not my problem. I think the two. So could it just be as simple as that? That Messiah complex is just belief that you are chosen by God to bring a message to humanity.
Yeah, I could see that working. Yeah,
Maybe that's why it's obscure, because there's really nothing more to define or
yeah.
to say about Messiah. So it's not actually obscure in the end. Okay, cool. Um, so this leads me to a question that I'm trying to formulate in my mind. So let me take a second. Well, before I do that, do you have anything to add insofar as definitions for these things?
No, no.
Okay, so they're clear enough. Uh, the question then becomes, like, what do we do about this? Is there anything to be done about this, or is it just inevitable? Like, should we try to mitigate it? One, as a community, and or just as individuals? Like, should individuals try to mitigate it, and if so, how?
Mm. Well, the way I see it is that people are predisposed to these particular patterns of thought. And the way to minimize it kind of begins with the environment they come from, as opposed to anything that the community can do specifically. Because if they arrive there and they are already within these states of mind, I don't think there's a single person there or even groups of people there that could get them out of it outside of not feeding that that behavior of theirs. And but that is also very isolating. They would just go somewhere else and then probably get what they want in some other space. So
That's the thing, yeah. Because like I'm thinking, it might be a matter of degree, right? Like if you are encountering a community of people that disagree with what you're saying, it might bring you back to reality and say, well, but it's very easy to delude yourself into thinking, well, these people are, the Antichrist or whatever. They're not. They're blind, and I can't save them. And I really am. Like, it's a sign. They see that as a justification. Even, hey, this justifies me being the Messiah. Like, not everyone will want to listen to the message, and so on. So,
yeah. Th- There
yeah.
is one more thing I do want to add about the Messiah complex. It's that they have this tendency, or people with that complex tend to have the tendency to make their own gatherings and groups and communities and cults and spread the message to those people that enter. And they consider that good enough. They kind of isolate themselves to make their own thing. And anyone else that kind of comes inside to try and uh, cause dissent, well, they just send them away or shun them or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, so they create their own environments, their own bubbles. It's to use the word that I used in the conference, incestuous. I liked that. I think it literally is the most accurate word. Now, I know there's a lot of negative connotations behind it, but I don't see any other word that describes it better. It's an environment where the same information or DNA is being shared.
Yeah.
There's not enough diversity there, and that creates a echo chamber, right? And reinforces the bubble, reinforces the God complex or Messiah complex or whatever.
Yep.
Um, so like, but are these things good or bad? Now that's the question, because now we're discussing these things, and of course people are probably going to think these are bad right away. But what if it's necessary? What if it is required for people to spread their message, and in order to be motivated to spread their message, it requires God complex and Messiah complex.
Mhm.
Uh,
I mean, I would say it to make one's own community and to make their own space and draw boundaries as to what is and is not allowed. There has to be, like, they have to take in not necessarily the complex itself, but uh, its general functions and how the good aspects of it, of community building and space building and
mhm.
making law structures and the like. Those things are required for those specific things. But if any one thing gets out of hand, or if there's any sort of extreme in any particular quality, it can always be bad. Yeah.
Yeah, because like, so this is starting to get into more into dogmatism, which is what I wanted to discuss as well, right? Like, it seems to me like dogma like where do you draw the line between dogmatism and just structure? Because at the end of the day, a community with a specific set of rules or activities, you have to respect the integrity of the structure to a degree for it to work. I mean, if people are a part of a group that discusses health, but then people start to talk about fashion and whatever else. If you're not respecting the law insofar as the structure of the group is just tailored towards health, and if it's not relevant to health, because you know what I mean, like people might start talking about sports because it's relevant to health, but that's where things become fuzzy, right? You can always have these like fuzzy issues, and then the dogmatism will dictate how hard that community is delineating the rules or not. Like, um, so it's like, no, we're talking about food. That's it. Like, what is healthy to eat? It's not about exercise and all that. That's what we mean by health. So, the dogmatism does have a purpose, I think, to some degree, that which is if we define dogmatism to just be the enforcement of the law that you set down in place in order to create an integrity of the structure, or to preserve the integrity of the structure. So, like, where does dogmatism become bad or negative or self, like it's kind of conflicting with your, you know what I mean, like, because like there are structures that I believe that provide shelter, right, and then there are structures that uh, imprison you, and so the safety of the shelter is outweighed by the danger of being imprisoned when it comes to ideas. So at what point does dogmatism enter that realm to you? Like, would you say that some people's structures, for example, that only have one thing you have to abide by, like no exceptions, is that would be okay? But if that thing to abide by is evil, right? They say you have to have sex with the cult leader, for example, right? Like, obviously, even though it's just one thing and you can do whatever else you want, it's still dogmatism to the degree that it's negative, right? So do you see what I mean? Like, I'm trying to parse out the complexity here. Like, it's not so easy to just say dogmatism is good or dogmatism is bad. So giving you all of that mess, here you go, Brandon. What do you make of this?
So I see dogmatism as a an expressive action. I would say that every individual ever is inherently dogmatic because the function of dogmatic, or rather, the image I prefer to paint of dogmatism is like you treat an individual as a cycle, just a circle that is just repeating, doing its own thing, doing whatever, and then there's some other circle that's kind of making not quite a circular shape, and the individual that is closer to a perfect circle will go, I don't like that shape. I'm going to change it. So the vectors of the circle, the arrows that make the circle in this circular loop, just kind of fires off towards the other circle, and then it kind of just intersects the other circle. It makes it not as oblong as it was, and just kind of makes it basically causes the replication of what someone already is, uh, usually in a verbal sense. It's like, yeah, I'm going to convert you into something else because I don't want you to be that. You need to be this because it is, from my own perspective, better. And yeah, no, it destroys the structure of someone else in favor of a pre existing thing. And that can be good if the dogma, the expressed language, is actually beneficial. But if done improperly, it can harm the other structure, the other person slash individual. So there has to be specific approaches if you want to change people, as opposed to just forcing them into a different structure that they are not accustomed to. It's like trying to get people to adapt. If you make someone adapt way too quickly, they will probably break. If you do it slowly, incrementally over time, it's not as bad. Um, but again, it very much depends on the message and the content of what is being expressed, and not so much uh, the frequency or degree of what is expressed, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so if I can reiterate that in another simpler way, are you saying that it depends what output like the actual content of the message or what is being enforced, rather than the degree to which you're enforcing.
Yes, that's what I would say. And also how quickly the changes are happening.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
I
again, if
agree.
it's too quickly, it is going to be bad more than likely.
Yeah, even if it's good for you, like people never adapt too quickly. I mean, you can't. For example, if tomorrow the temperature plunges to like -50, well, people can't adapt that quickly. But over time, it's possible that the human body could adapt to that kind of weather. I mean, we survived the last ice age probably because our bodies were able to handle that kind of cold at some point. We had
Yep.
more fur and stuff like that on us.
Yeah, it was just a
So
steady shift, and we adapted. Yep.
yeah, I agree with that. So it's interesting. That's why I was thinking it's not necessarily cut and dry that dogmatism is necessarily bad, or that people have God complex is necessarily bad. But I think if it becomes destructive to yourself or to your community, um, obviously it could definitely become bad. I think the potential is there for things to become good or bad. And again, there's a degree of relativity there as well. But it seems like what is right or wrong seems to be an emergent from phenomenon when it comes to these things. Like entire cultures, entire peoples over a certain span of time is what dictates what we consider as being good or bad, what should be enforced, what shouldn't be enforced. So, you know, if we see it that way, um, there might not be much else to say about dogmatism other than just this is this is the complexity that we've inherited here.
Yeah.
Um, but let's bring it back to a little bit more of the community that we're dealing with or that we're a part of generally. And by that, I'm drawing a larger circle. I'm talking about the public intellectual sphere, what for a time was called the intellectual dark web, right? There was a core of people like Eric Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Rubin, and so on. I think the intellectual dark web is a web that's growing. I think just people coming together and discussing ideas, that being popular and people watching and listening for hours on end, that is a phenomenon that's relatively new and recent. I mean, I think I don't even know if in the past it was that popular. I'm talking about like in the 1900s and so on. Like, did people gather together to learn? I think they did in institutions and stuff, but I don't think it was popular like popular culture. So I think it's a relatively new phenomenon, and so insofar as the community of people coming together discussing ideas, God complex, Messiah, saviorism, dogmatism, in a bit of a yes or no kind of fashion, I want to force you into the dilemma.
Sure.
Would you say that it plagues this community or not?
Hmm. All of those plaguing. Mm, I mean, I can't say yes or no. There are, it's obviously there in some aspects, but no, I wouldn't say it plagues. No, it's just sort of there, but
Mhm.
not in any blatant. Not, I won't say blatant ways. In uh, abundant ways. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, because now we can get a little bit more abstract and we can dilute everything and start to incorporate, polarization, people being in their own camps, and dogmatism in general. Like, hey, I'm a lefty or I'm a righty or whatever. I'm woke or I anti woke, anti fascist, fascist, whatever. Um, these kinds of camps, these kinds of polarizations, we, I would say there isn't. We are plagued by polarization for sure. Now, polarization happens due to dogmatism. So it depends on if we're talking about entire groups or individuals. So, like, insofar as individuals, I would agree with you. It's not plaguing us. There aren't like a bunch of people all the time claiming that, hey, I have the information, I can save people, or I don't understand why everyone's not listening to me because I am the epitome of knowledge or whatever. I don't think that's so common, but I do believe that people in the same breath or in the same spirit do the same thing, but insofar as their group, not me as an individual, but my group, my belief system, right? It's proliferated in religion, for example, and in political parties and so on. So that's my opinion. Um, do you disagree or agree? Or
I don't disagree. From what media portrays and what people within uh, this in front of media and also just kind of watching it all the time, yeah, they'll probably see the same thing. If
Mhm.
you go to like people that are just out there in the world, not really paying attention to much of it, well, they're probably not plagued with any degree of polarization. They're just kind of living their lives, probably.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. I want to turn this into much more personal.
Sure.
You, Brandon, as the observer, right? Like, because you're just observing, insofar as what you've proclaimed, like yourself. I haven't put words in your mouth here, but
Sure.
you've said it multiple times that you observe. You tend to just like to take that seated back position. Is that in some form maybe not God complex, because it doesn't necessarily point to the fact that you believe you're God, but are you behaving like God? Do you take a do you get a kick out of it? Like, hey, I'm being the observer here.
Well, I will say that I have those tendencies within me.
Yeah.
I
So
already know. I know
okay,
what I am. I psychoanalyzed myself.
there you go. So that leads me to a very particular paradox that I've personally struggled with. The humility aspect. I want us to discuss humility here
Sure.
because if you are humble enough to say, I am going through God complex, or I've dealt with it, and I don't, and just because you don't say you are, but you, it's kind of like Canadians, right? Like people always say, like, what do you Canadians think about Americans, right? And we never say we're better than they are, but we do believe it, right? So, you know, uh, I don't. I personally don't. I don't believe. It's funny. I'm Canadian. You're American. I just realized. Um, I think I did in the past. I did definitely think, yeah, we're better, and I think maybe to some degree, I think we are in some way. But better in relation to what? That doesn't make really any
Yeah.
sense. But that sort of tribalistic desire to believe you're better than another group, it's in me as well. So does that humility, like, interestingly for me, that humility, it also pushes you further into God complex because you say I or Messiah complex. I am the humble one there, and I'm the one who doesn't say that I'm God. Like I'm the one who, and Nietzsche put his finger on this. I love this in, I think it was the Genealogy of Morals, where he said, he quoted the Bible. It was the quote when, and this is a paraphrase, those who are, so for those who are arrogant, God will lower, and for those who are humble, God will raise them. Something like that. So those who are humble will be raised; those who are arrogant will be um, lowered. So put in their place, in other words. And then Nietzsche came along and said, "And those who humble themselves want to be raised." You know, and I found that brilliant because it's true. False humility, false modesty, to me it's the height of hypocrisy, and I really despise anything that has to do with hypocrisy. Um, but there is a paradox at the root of that because if, for example, there's one hypocrisy that I reserve to myself, and here's my preaching when I'm dogmatic about something. Like the one thing I want to enforce in the world is don't preach. Like don't tell people what they should think and believe. Like just like what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Proselytization. Like don't proselytize. I hate that.
Yeah.
Try converting people and stuff. But here's the beauty of it. I do proselytize. I proselytize about people not proselytizing. That is the one hypocrisy I reserve to myself. And I realized you have to accept one hypocrisy one way or another, because I'm hypocritical in this, in the fact that I proselytize over that one point. But I think that's better than proselytizing about just any whimsical thing you want to proselytize about. Just, I'm a Cubs fan and you're, not, and so you should, whatever. That was a bad example, but um, like, so to me, if you are humble, it's a similar kind of paradox. If you are saying to yourself, look, I am the humble one, maybe, and I'm not telling others that I'm God, and I'm telling others that believe that they're God, that, that they're not, in a way. Like, I'm trying to help them out of that. Like, that might make you think that you are God in a way. There's like a loop there, or the Messiah. So I've personally had that experience. I've never discussed it publicly. I've discussed it with my mentor, actually, but never in a public fashion like this. So, I'm aware of that. I'm aware that it can get that interesting or that complex. So I don't know where was that leading to a maybe that was just a statement or something. But I don't know. But do you have any comments about that? Have you experienced that yourself, or?
Mm, I wouldn't say that I thought too much about humility. I mean, I have a definition of humility, like, and beyond that, it's like, I don't know. I'm just kind of here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've suffered with aspects of God complex before, and I lowered myself out of that steadily after realizing that, well, I don't know everything. That's literally impossible. I can't fit the world in my head. That sounds like madness anyway. So
yeah. See, that must be the underlying motivation, because you can't literally know everything, but is there a way to find some kind of knowledge that packages everything, and so you do technically know everything, so you convince yourself that you do, right? So that's what's interesting. I think that a lot of what might be motivating people towards theories of everything is this idea that it's possible to be that one. It's like a rat race, like, hey, maybe I will know everything, and then I will become God in some way. It's subconscious. We don't think about it that way, but the underlying motivation might be that. Because again, I think people are predisposed towards information and knowing. People don't like to not know. So it might also be fear there as well as a motivator, like fear of the unknown. Um, and so you necessarily make yourself into God, because if you're God, you know everything. If you know everything, you're safe. So there's so much complexity to this, and I think it's important to talk about it. I think it's important to discuss it. And just talking about remedies here before I move on to a question that I have for you. Uh, I met a guy recently who told me, like, James, focus on the message, not the messenger. I can be the messenger today, and then tomorrow I'm not. I'm an idiot. And then someone down the street, maybe a 3-year-old kid, whatever, or a insane person or whatever. So, like, focus on the message, not the messenger. And we are all messengers in that way. That I found to be interesting. It can kind of ground you a little bit. To me, God complex comes as a flare up. It doesn't come as like a constant thing I have to battle every day. It's just, if I, like, the other day or a couple months ago, I had this sense that I understood something about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and I was like, I understand why Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is what it is. Like, I've couched it in a higher truth. Oh my God. And that day I was so happy. I just felt like I was floating around, and I was so channeled into everything that I felt, yeah, conflated with God. And so it really only happens when I get these, like, information dumps in a way. And it's ironic, because it is a type of humility that will open you up to receiving information, and then as soon as you receive it, it kind of closes you up and you lose the humility. So it's always this, like, practice of trying to stay open no matter how much information you get, and to stay humble, which is interesting. But again, I think that humility paradox, we can call it now, is an issue that makes it a challenge. If it didn't exist as a paradox, then it wouldn't be a challenge to stay humble all the time. So
yeah,
the more you learn, the more you have to struggle with God complex, in my view. It's like climbing Mount Everest. It gets harder and colder the higher you go.
Yep.
Less oxygen there. Okay, so that leads me to asking you: Do you said you've dealt with God complex aspects? So can you go in a little bit further into detail there? Can you give a bit more, let's say, candid information?
Yeah, when I was working on my book, a framework of the world, as I titled it before I just knocked off that subtitle. It was a means of trying to fit in as much as I can about the world into as small a space as possible. And while I did learn a lot about it, and well, like, I guess that was like the end goal of it. While I was going through it, I was kind of obsessed with any small revelation that I had, and I went, "Oh my goodness, this is the truth," etc., things like that. And well, it's like, yeah, sure, that's just a piece of information that just about anyone could know. What's the big deal? And yeah, that's more or less where I stand now.
Mhm.
And yeah, the small convergences of information where I went, wow, this is just fitting together so neatly. This is great. That those are the flare ups of God complex, really, and also going around and seeing just how much things appear to be incorrect as opposed to what I thought to be true. Yeah, that also reinforced it. Overcoming uh, beliefs that or information that was taught in the past and affirming those to be incorrect, those also heighten God complex.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
other things, like external confirmation, for example, right? Where recently, and because I'm going to be discussing, uh, we have a debate coming up. If I can find more people in my camp, and I believe I did, um, but someone recently commented on my YouTube, my Pace One entry, Infinity Limited
Yep.
entry, and he's an electric engineer, I believe, and mathematician, and he congratulated me on finding a logical proof for what he considers to be a new axis in the division by zero thing, like Ramanujan. He was talking about, Ramanujan. You
Yeah,
heard?
I've heard of the. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, you know, and he says that he's working on a mathematical proof, and like he congratulated me in the sense that he is convinced, I believe, just as I am, of course, that you know the perception that I have, or the concept that I've created to understand infinity in a way, is a logical, valid axis of truth. And so, like, that is I mean, it can cause God complex. It didn't for me, of course. It's very uh, flattering, and it boosts the ego, but I don't think it boosts the ego all the way up into God complex. But I think it's possible for things like that. Like, if like several people come up to me, like, in the same day, and they say, "Oh my God, you're brilliant. You do this, you do that," and, like, and obviously enough ego flattery can boost you into God complex. Um, so that is what I call external confirmation. Right? People are coming out of nowhere. It's not like you're looking for things, but they come, right? And you have to ask yourself, well, it's not exactly out of nowhere, is it? Because you put out an idea that attracted a certain person, and if you take into account that we are many people and that you're bound to have someone that agrees with you, then you realize, well, it doesn't make you right, doesn't make you, the god of anything, or that because you're bound to find someone that agrees with you, right? Even if you're in a camp that barely anyone agrees with. So yeah, um, I think these are all things that we're going through in the toe community, but also, and I do want to start to stray away from toe theories of everything a little bit. But it is an ecosystem that's interesting. Do you have anything else to add? Do you have any more remarks, things we haven't covered? I know that we didn't get into your categorization. Maybe we can do that.
I mean, it's not super necessary since the parameters of what you wanted were pretty laid out. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I wanted to express a lot of my positions and my experiences and my outlook on this stuff. I am the one that seems to have been more interested in the God complex issue. Uh, but I, at the same time, wanted to get more of your opinion, not just to get you to agree with me or disagree, but to add on to things. I think you have made some contributions there, um, particularly into what creates these states of mind. So I think we should go into that a little bit. Let's go on for another 15 minutes, let's say, and and you can discuss your categories, but I want them to be clear. I want you to contextualize them first so that we understand what you're talking about. Like when you say harmony, when you say, so first off, you've come up with a system to categorize the psyche of people, especially people who, you know, deal with ideas, it seems like, which is why you seem to be very useful in this community. So, because you've recognized some markers about how people think that allows you to determine the kinds of ideas they're going to have, and then you can reverse engineer that. The kinds of ideas that people have dictates the kind of thought patterns that they have, and
Yep.
their personality in a way, or their character traits. So can you explain that a little bit? I don't know if you formalize it, if you have a name for it or not, but you definitely have your own terms, so I'd like you to define your terms as you go along as well.
Okay. So we'll break it down like this. There are three modes that well, stages of cognition, which is
Which is what, sorry?
expression, which
Okay.
is outward, forward, etc. And then there's intersection, which is thinking, the process of overlapping information and crossing the information together, exchanging.
Okay, so I want to write these down as because
Yep.
I want this for me as well. And I
Sure.
don't know if I can't. I guess I'll open this notes. And while we're on the topic of expression, that popped into my mind the German word for expression, which is ausdrücken, and it literally translates to out push. Like drücken, it means to push.
Yep.
So I like that you said if outward, forward. So Ausdruck in German is great language philosophically.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are three modes of what?
Three stages of
Stages.
cognition,
Okay.
which is the first one's expression, which you already wrote, and then there's intersection, which is crossing and comparing different expressions, basically.
Cross comparing. What's the other term in statistics? Uh, Cross referencing. Is that a better?
That also works, yes.
So expression, cross referencing.
And impression, which is the floor, the content itself,
Contents.
which is basically also memory.
Okay.
So the three fragments that I listed for this particular video, each of them fit in one of each stage. Harmony is expression. Resonance is cross-referencing. And will is impression slash memory.
Okay. So expression. So harmony fits in with an expression. What fits into intersection?
Resonance.
Resonance. And then in impression.
Impression is will.
Will. Okay, so we're talking about harmony, resonance, and will. So you've referred to these harmony, resonance, and will as fragments.
As fragments, yes.
So there are more than just these three.
Yes.
Okay, so within expression, for example, which is so we have stages and fragments so far. Within the three stages, you have multiple fragments, but you only mentioned three in regards to the God complex thing.
Yes.
Harmony, resonance, and will, which respectively enter in expression, intersection, and impression.
Perfect. Yes. Now, to describe harmony, harmony is basically outward emotional affect. It is to, I'll let you write that down, but that is, in short, what it is. and then we'll use will as a contrast against that because there's outward through harmony and inwards through will. Will is the solidification of desire,
Okay.
and resonance is the contrasting of desire, the comparison of desires.
Okay. Interesting. So that's starting to get more abstract, but we should start to discuss what do you mean by like outward emotional affects? What do you mean by contrasting of desire, solidification of desire, and so on?
Okay. So starting with the contrasting of desire, it would be you have an individual that is able to notice where they are in relation to other things, and they're very, very attuned to that. They'll probably be, if you were to put them inside of a network of some kind, and sort of a networking event, they would probably not be too keen on interacting with others, not that much. They would know how far away they are between people emotionally. They would be able to tell when they are, um, well, resonating with them. They would be able to tell.
Okay. So it sounds to me like it's the ability to understand where you are in the hierarchy
Yes, in a sense, more or less.
of the community or of the network. Okay. So yeah, because now you're talking about desire. Now I know contrast is a good word, but I don't know why desire comes into it.
Desire, it's focusing primarily on emotion, and that's what the basis of emotion is to me.
Okay.
It's like affect, desire, emotion. That's sort of the realm I'm working with.
Because it seems to me like there might be some truth there in the sense that so apparently there's a mechanism that regulates our position in the hierarchy. Like we understand where we if you enter a gym, like a locker or whatever, a locker room in a gym, you start to see like who's got bigger muscles and who has more confidence, who has more money, who can lift more, whatever. And these things actually regulate. Like you compare yourself based on data and you place yourself in a hierarchy. You know that you are on this level of cool, like you're this close to like the cool guy or like the tip of the hierarchy or whatever. And so but then there's also what you could describe as desire. So you might be placed in a certain like level of the hierarchy, but then you might have the desire to be placed somewhere else, like higher or lower, like you want to distance yourself from it or you want to get closer to it, whatever. So is that what you're talking about?
That particular explanation that you just gave is another cross-referencing fragment called presence.
Okay, so contrasting of desire, I still don't understand it.
Right. I might have used desire improperly here. It is the comparison of emotional affect, just specifically emotional affect. What you described, presence is definitely orientated towards degrees of hierarchy and where one stands physically in some place in comparison to other things.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like there seems to be the actuality, and then like from an like an objective observer,
Yep.
you can see well here this person's like third, fourth, fifth, or whatever in the
Yep.
hierarchy, and then there's like the desire. Like you might be third, but you want to be first because you're close enough to the top, and like
Yep.
and you see this in the animal world, right? Like the two following, let's say beta males vie for position of the first, right? And so that's the desire, anyways, to take the top. So
Yeah. Um,
what I'm trying to say is like when you say desire, are you talking about the actuality and like or what you wish the actuality was? Because you're saying that's presence, but presence you define just as being the actuality of where you are in the hierarchy, right?
right. Right. Um,
So you see what I mean? Like I'm just holding your feet to the fire because you're using desire, and desire implies that you don't have something and you want it.
yeah.
So in
Okay.
this context,
To make it a bit more distinct, I would say resonance is the comparison of contexts more than desires.
Okay,
And
contrast.
contexts are specifically connections.
Okay, so let's say, using my analogy and furthering it, there's the context of you being in the locker room with in the gym,
Yep.
and then being in the classroom with your pencil. So like the same people, different context. So
Yes.
in the gym you might be third or fifth, and in the classroom you might be first, right? And that comparison of context, is that what you're talking about?
Um, in this context, it would be more about the relationship between people individually. It's like, okay, you set up two different places, which is perfect. Say that someone is going into the gym, and then they look at around at all the people in there, and they don't feel that they share a space in that because they realize that their context, themselves versus the people in that gym, their contexts are wildly different. They would pick up on that. But if they go into the classroom, they can piece together their connection between other people in that environment and go, okay, I belong here instead of the gym.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems to me like it's comparative of context. So contrasting of context would be what I would personally write for my own
Yeah,
understanding.
there you go.
Um,
Yeah, it's
so
mostly about belonging. That's the general vibe that resonance evokes. Yeah.
okay. So how much you resonate with the context that you find yourself in.
Yes.
Okay. And so, but you're also bringing into account like the contrast of that, meaning like the ones that you resonate with versus the ones you don't. That's where the
Yes.
contrast comes in.
Yep.
Okay. So the act, if you will, of placing yourself within the context that is desirable, to bring your word back into it.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And then, so that's resonance. Harmony, we said outward emotional effect. So we started with resonance. So can we go to harmony?
Yeah. Harmony. This one is outward emotional synchronization specifically. It is having it so that people mirror your emotional affect, whatever that is expressed as. So if someone is crying and the harmonic individual notices this, they will feel sad for them and mirror their reactions, which is basically that's like the floor of how they tend to respond.
Okay, so empathy and mirroring. I bring the word empathy in, but it might just be, even if you don't feel, you might still be mirroring, right? Like
Exactly,
I
yes.
don't feel sad, but I'll at least mirror them, and like I'll get a little bit lower. I won't
Yep.
be so confident. My body language will show I'm here to be with you in
Yep.
this bad moment. Okay, so empathy and mirroring, contrasting of context, and then we have will, which is the solidification of desire.
Yeah. And if we're going to replace desire with instead context, then it would be the solidification of connections and stacking those on top of each other to make a network of connections.
Okay, so it's to create a network of connections. Okay,
And basically to make a totality of connections. Yeah, that's basically all it is.
all right. So to reiterate, we have will, resonance, and harmony, which respectively enter in impression, intersection, and expression, which are stages of cognition. Now, you reference this quite strongly in your description of God complex. How does this relate to God complex?
All right. So God complex is will centric, which means it orbits around the concept of will primarily because they are lacking usually harmony, which is they don't want to mirror other people's things. They want to sever themselves away from other connections and want to integrate and heighten their own internalized connections. And they will not enjoy seeing any other connections that are not fitting inside of their own. Because, of course, those internal connections are also inherently emotional. They don't want any disturbance there whatsoever, usually.
It's pretty cool, man. I mean, it all just crystallized right there in one interesting, very efficient
Yeah.
sentence. So if you could say it this way, will is inflated and counterbalanced to harmony, and so the harmony goes down, will goes up. And resonance is the pivoting point.
Yeah, resonance is usually what they use to filter in the information and discern which things fit and which things don't.
I mean, that's brilliant, man. Okay, that and so that is so when you see the markers that dictate someone exercising their will a lot more, then you can basically state that they are in God complex territory.
Yep, that's right.
Or yeah, okay,
Yep.
brilliant, man. Loving it. I love how you've created these categories, and I think they're quite legitimate. I don't know up against what other kind of psychological material you could put it up to see just how legitimate it is, where you
Yeah.
get your data, and so on. But I like it that you've done it for yourself, and in relation to this God complex thing, it's fantastic because it is it does legitimize. If someone has a strong will, you could say, yeah, this person is at risk of God complex.
Yeah,
So
predisposed.
we can also maybe use that as a way to help people and say, look, like how much harmony do you practice in your life? Because if you are God, you would harmonize things a little bit more, right? You wouldn't just have will. Even in Christianity, you have the just God and you have the jealous God, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
you
it's
know
like if you are God, I mean, there are 9 total fragments, right? Maximize all of them, really become God.
yeah, yeah. So that just
Do
opens.
it.
There it is. Yeah, do it. I love that. That again, Morpheus Jr. with his prophecy. Do it. This is a fascinating discussion, man. I really enjoy it. Again, I want to thank you for the. But before I sort of come to closing comments, do you have anything you want to add or anything you think we missed?
Um, Nothing really to add in terms of the discussion, but I will say that I am going to be writing more extensively about all of this work that I've been discussing, really my own personal work, and sharing it to the public and
Okay.
teaching people about these concepts because I do believe that they are helpful in some aspect for at least a framework to look at the world, and people can dismiss it or take it in as they so please.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I want to support you in that. I think it would be. I would like to learn more about your system of categorization here and as well. I think people should use it more to determine to do more self introspection. Let's say,
Yep.
and but insofar as will, I hadn't thought about that.
Hmm.
If you exercise so much will, yeah, it brought me to the question of virtue. Like a lot of people with God complex, they have no virtue. I mean, it doesn't matter how sophisticated their theory is or their message is and how true it might be. It could be more true than anything else. But, you know, God invokes a lot, like the word God invokes a lot of morality. And we don't see much morality thrown, like we're not discussing morals really at all that much in the Toe community anyway. Insofar as etiquette on how we should behave with each other, yes, because we've discussed a little bit of like political correctness. Can we say certain things, can we not say certain things? And we do see a lot of, sometimes we see some spats, people going back and forth. The monkey brain pops up and we start to insult each other and all that. So that's normal, but morality doesn't come in too much. And I actually do have a large part of my philosophy, which is called paradoxism, discusses morality. I've actually, from my world, from my view, I believe that I've mapped on a 1-to-1 ratio. Our systems of morality literally directly come from our physics and metaphysics. It's pretty cool. So, virtue seems to be a major part of a theory of everything because ultimately, if you determine that a theory of everything or a unified theory would ultimately be to help you figure out how to live, right? Or give you meaning or something, or how to make decisions in real time, that sort of thing. Like the utility of a theory, right? Like, I don't think people are just doing it to. Christopher Langan said that once. He said, like, it would feel pretty good. So just purely enjoying understanding God or understanding everything is a good motivation. But my personal motivation was to know how to behave in the world, and to behave morally, to behave and to have purpose and derive meaning. So to me, these purpose, meaning, morality, these are the three things that motivated me, and I believe motivates everyone that joins religion or just practices spirituality. I think every human being has those desires. So it's interesting that we see these people with God complexes who have the exact opposite of virtue. They're like incredibly rude or incredibly impatient or whatever, and it's like, well, just how much of a god are you, man? Like, you're more like the devil. I don't know, but again, these are arbitrary distinctions. They're kind of relativistic. So, maybe we have a pantheon of gods. The Greeks, the way they viewed gods, they weren't perfect. They weren't like, virtuous necessarily. They had jealousy. They had very human qualities. So I think the Toe community is more of like a pantheon of gods in a way. Um, anyway, man, I really appreciate your time and your opinions and the opportunity to help myself kind of express what I had like sentiments on the topic. I think I can let it go now. Just point to this video, say, hey, if you want to know about what I think, just watch this hour and a half. I'm gonna let you go unless there's anything else you have to say.
Nothing else. No.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.